On to our final topic with the land appraisal process. So, Ms. Giles, please take it away.
The next topic is the state and federal land
Oh,
swap.
yes, my
Okay.
apologies. Yeah.
Okay.
We already, yeah, I thought we'd covered that. Anyway, state and
So
federal
we
land.
could do that other one again if you
Wow.
want. State and federal land swap to raise revenue for K-12 education. As far as our discussion points in this arena are concerned, the ways that we are monetizing conservation is through our game and fish leases. We have leases with game and fish for various activities. We have a habitat bank, which we grow our own sage grouse on state trust lands. We're part of the Sweetwater Conservancy Sage Grouse Bank. We worked a deal through that, and so we would entertain additional banks if the opportunity arises. Current processes that we have that are ongoing at this time are the Lander Front and Fortification Creek. And we're also waiting, at the last meeting, or the meeting before, there was some talk about us working with the WPLI process, the Wyoming Public Lands Initiative, which we have. We've been cooperating with them because the local input is on the best use of the property is the best way to go, we feel. And there are various stakeholders involved. There's industry, development, oil and gas, ag, recreation, as well as government. It is our understanding that the Wyoming County Commissioners Association has compiled that the advisory committee has compiled that list of recommendations, but we have not seen a copy of that. And we have been in contact with Jeremiah Riemann, who is the current executive director of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association, and he's trying to track that down from the previous executive director. So I would entertain any questions so far.
Any questions, committee? And that's talking about sage grouse, you said specifically, or?
Mr. Chairman, we participate in the Sweetwater Conservancy Sage Grouse Conservation Bank, but the Wyoming County Commissioners Association, that has to do with the Wyoming Public Lands Initiative, which is totally separate.
Okay.
Okay. And that's, they're looking at lands in WCA's wilderness, WSA's wilderness, and those at the county level. And the Public Lands Initiative was to work at the local level. I'm sure all of your counties are involved, but they work at the local level. They develop their recommendations. They pass it on to an advisory committee. That advisory committee works. All the counties work together and then again push those recommendations forward. And then when they go forward, they go to the federal agencies, the governor's office, and then they come up with those recommendations, and then they push it on to DC for legislation in an effort to get a quicker transaction in place.
Any questions on those county commissioner-led efforts, committee? And so I heard we're not sure where the status of that process.
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, we're not sure where that is. Like I said, we've reached out to the current county executive director, and he's reached out to the previous one. So
okay.
Okay. Any further questions?
Don't see any.
Okay. So as I said, our priorities are Fortification Creek in Campbell County. That involves 640 acres. It's fully encompassed within a BLM designated fortification wilderness study area. The estimated gas reserves under that parcel are 16.5 billion cubic feet. The 2014 price of MCF was 437 per MCF, so there was approximately 12 million total estimated in royalty under that parcel. And the 2019 price, unfortunately, is 256 per MCF. So right now it looks, there's approximately 7,039,000 total estimated royalty under that parcel. We first initiated the BLM's first phase in December of 2014. Currently in the land selection process of BLM managed land. We do have some areas that we're interested in. And then the next one would be the Lander Front or the Lander Slope in Fremont County. That's approximately 16,050 acres. It's adjacent to or encompassed by the Lander Slope area of critical environmental concern, that ACEC, or the Red Canyon ACEC, as outlined in the BLM's Lander Field Office Resource Management Plan. There are 9 phosphate leases relinquished. We relinquished 9 phosphate leases due to the inability to gain access or mine due to the BLM's environmental restrictions. The potential annual rental is of $1 per acre and the potential royalty of 5% of the gross value mined. The Wyoming Game and Fish leases many of the parcels for habitat protection, and that annual rental is $5,700 per year. Approximately $17,000 in annual grazing and agricultural lease revenue is derived from this acreage. And we initiated the BLM's first phase of that exchange process again on December 1st, 2014. Fortification Creek is the first priority for completion, and the Lander Front process is on hold pending the Fortification Creek's progress.
Okay, so any questions on those 2 parcels, committee? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on Fortification Creek. So that's a wilderness study area, and and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, the wilderness study designation has a limitation of how long that's supposed to be there for, and then they are supposed to either designate it as a wilderness area or delist that. And so is there any chance to get that delisted under this administration, or is that just wasted effort?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, on that parcel, you're right, it is a wilderness study area, and it does have a limited designation status. However, that status has passed, and that is also part of this Wyoming Public Land Initiative, because there are several of these across the state that the counties are working together in order to, it's either designate them or move on, basically, in summary. And again, we're waiting to see where they are, where the county commissioners are with that process before we move on that. But you are correct. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I guess we would answer any questions you may have in regard to this. I might note that we also included the stranded state lands inventory and valuation matrix. We included that in our handout that we prepared for y'all in September of 2017. If you have any questions relative to that matrix, we'd be happy to answer those questions. Ben was very instrumental in putting that matrix together, so that's why I brought him.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we've heard those 2 parcels that we've already initiated the process to dispose of through this exchange process. And we've also heard quite a bit about the Kelly parcel in Teton County. And so I'd just like to, I guess first of all, Mr. Chairman, the way I see this working, and it's my proposal to the committee and to state lands, is that we identify definitely those 2 parcels, probably also the Kelly parcel, which has received significant attention. and put all those up, you know, say it publicly, these are the lands we're looking to exchange. And with the idea being that we have some help identifying lands that we're hoping to get in return. And so once we've nominated these parcels, obviously the next step is to identify federal land or federal minerals, which may be better used or more efficiently managed as a state property, and proceed from that. With that exchange, once we identify what we want in return, basically. So that's the value I see of this public process, is identifying potential for what would become state property. Because when you have that, especially if you're talking about grazing leases or current uses of the land, especially, it does become tricky when you're dealing with the current leaseholders. We have to be very cognizant of, you know, perhaps not every leaseholder currently has a federal lease is going to want a state lease, since they are more competitive. And so that's the value I see of having the general public nominate lands they think would be, they wouldn't mind if they say they currently have a federal lease, they actually wouldn't mind it being a state lease. We have an opportunity to air that publicly as we are now. And we also have an opportunity, to take over or exchange for these state parcels have just maybe federal minerals. That's possible under this exchange as well. So like I said, I hope that members of this committee can help in identifying the federal land or even just federal minerals that we would want in exchange under this program, hopefully with the objective of having a well-defined proposal, at least for these two parcels, and potentially also the Kelly parcel by our September meeting. So at least we can have a concrete discussion as to what the exchange would actually look like. A holistic picture, I guess, not just the state parcels we want to give up, but the federal parcels and that we'd want in return as part of this exchange. So that's the general idea here as far as the public process. We could propose resolutions if we want, but at the end of the day, I think it's what we learned during last session is that if you have just a generic idea with no specifics, then it's easy to see the boogeyman in a lot of those. And you can make up any sort of a scary scenario where that exchange wouldn't work out in the best interest of the public. If we have a specific exchange that could be offered as federal legislation, then we can have a more serious discussion about whether that particular exchange, that particular proposal is going to be in the best interest of everybody involved. Ultimately, keep in mind the objective here is to raise money for K through 12, which obviously we don't need anybody to tell us that that's something that we need to work on significantly, still moving forward. So that being said, I guess I'll try to find a question here for state lands. So we talked about Fortification Creek. We talked about Lander Front. Can we discuss a little bit the Kelly parcel? Obviously, it has a long and storied history in the legislature. And is there any, can you just give us an update on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The Kelly parcel is located, of course, in Teton County. It's 640 acres. The latest value of that, which is not current, it was appraised at 46 million. The current uses, it's got a grazing and agricultural lease of 335 AUMs. That lease is due to expire in March of 2022. The annual revenue generated by that ag lease is $2,070 a year. There is an easement that was issued in 1965 to Grand Teton National Park for zero consideration because they're a sister agency. It's for a 1,000-foot roadway and scenic easement, no development within 500 foot on either side of that center line. It was like a VRM thing, a visual thing for them. This is the last of 4 parcels that have been disposed of to the federal government or Teton National Park through direct sale. And all agreements and processes have expired. It did, as you said, it had a lot of fits and starts in this last one. Originally, they were going to buy it, and then we came back to you and asked if they, we wanted to amend that agreement so that they could exchange it. And time ran out, and it expired in December of don't remember the year, but a couple of years.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we heard a rough valuation of about 12 million for the Isolation Creek. Is that correct? In terms of the rough values of the state parcels we're hoping to exchange. But, and so did I hear correct? Well, first of all, 46 million for the Kelly parcel. Is that what I heard?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. 40, well, that's an old appraisal,
Right.
but it's 46 million, yes.
And for the Isolation Creek, what was the rough valuation?
Fortification Creek was
Sorry.
20, yeah, 12 million.
The isolated Fortification Creek, okay. And do we have a rough valuation of the Lander front?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I need to correct
Oh,
myself.
sorry.
The 12 million was a 2014 price of at 437 per MCF. That's the royalty that is under. That's not actually, an appraisal has not been done on that property. That is the value of the royalty for the gas in place on that
Right.
parcel.
Okay.
But the 2019 price for that is $2.56 per MCF, which comes to approximately 7,039,000.
Okay. And do you have a similar rough valuation for?
Let's see, on Lander's Slope, it looks like we generate approximately 17,000 annually in grazing and ag revenue on that. That has not been appraised.
Yeah, so committee, that's the numbers that we're talking about. So it might be helpful to consider that. And obviously we'll have to have probably another evaluation of those as we move forward. But that should give you an idea of the assets that we have to dispose of. And so hopefully that gives you a rough idea of what we'd be looking in terms of what we could get in exchange. So that's very helpful. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, when we were working through the most recent Grand Teton National Park, when we were working through that exchange or that proposed exchange, we did identify parcels that we called, actually, the bird. It's shaped as a bird. That's why it's called the bird. And we included the Wyoming geologist and several others. We did some analysis on it. And those, I mean, we did identify some parcels. We have not shared those maps because it would be premature at this time, and we don't want to alarm any of our lessees, grazing or mineral or otherwise, because in the event of an exchange, you know what would happen. And so we don't want anybody until this moves further down the road. But nonetheless, we have identified lands for those, and we were going to move those over to and use those lands for Lander Slope and Fortification Creek, because we kept those segregated.
Good follow-up, go ahead.
And so just so everybody understands, I mean, we talked about, say, the royalty rate charged by the federal government versus state government for oil and gas, for example. Would that change if, say, oil and gas company is currently leasing federal minerals at 12.5% and it switches to state minerals? Would that royalty rate go up then?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not an attorney, but
Okay.
that is a contract and I don't think we can change that.
Okay, so it'll only be moving forward for new leases, is that?
Mr. Chairman, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in regards to the leases, if something were to occur with that transfer, how would you handle their leases and make sure that they're informed and protected and all of that, should you come to the point where we do start transferring land?
Mr. Chairman, our lease has a provision in it that the land can be sold at any time. And so they are on notice when they take that lease. On the federal side, however, they would receive the grazing lessee the federal grazing lessee would receive a notice of cancellation 2 years in advance, or for 2 years. When it reaches the end of that 2-year term and they move to our terms, that would trigger vacant land. It would be a new lease on us. It would be vacant land and competitive. So.
Further question, committee? Question, okay. Yes. All right,
Mr. Chairman, I have nothing further unless you have any more questions, or I do have one
Okay.
thing.
No.
My parting statement. The very last packet, the very last packet that you have of information are standard reports that we normally provide for you as updates. We didn't go through those, but we wanted to make sure you still had those because we are required to provide you with those at every meeting. So.
And yeah, we appreciate that. And I don't think there's necessarily a need to go through those in detail unless anybody has any questions, committee, on the inflow, outflow, money issues. So, okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for the information. And yeah, Representative Blake.
I would be remiss if we didn't say that it's been a pleasure to have Susan here at all our meetings the past 13 years that I've been here. And she's a great asset to the Office of State Lands and Investment. I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we know you're going to miss it.
Maybe not right away.
Well, thank you for all of your service and all of your work over the years. So it's much
Thank you,
appreciated.
Mr. Chairman. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, committee, if there are no further questions on the information in front of us, we'll take public comment. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kristin Gunther with the Wyoming Outdoor Council. And I have to express my gratitude to Chairman Boner because actually most of what I was going to say to the committee, you've already covered. So thank you for that. But just to reiterate a couple of things from our perspective, the Wyoming Outdoor Council supported the resolution last year. And I think that what Chairman Boner has said about the importance of being specific and including the details of these transfers, we found that to be really true. Especially in messaging to the public, the kind of conservation, recreation-minded public. Was really interested to know what this was going to look like on the ground. And so I think that in moving forward with any of these, especially if you're going to focus on these priority areas, that's going to be a really important step. Sort of knowing what is going to be exchanged for what. The details really matter to people for sure. Obviously, from our perspective, once we look at the federal lands that would be traded out for state lands, we'll be interested to make sure there's not significant recreation or conservation losses associated with that trade. But again, that's all part of that detail sort of oriented proposal. And I just think that to reiterate the point about making it clear to the public, making it public, what this exchange looks like, what is it for, why are we doing it is a critical piece of this. So thank you for considering this topic further, and I will stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Question committee for Ms. Gunther. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yes, Jess, come on up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I want to introduce one of our interns with Wyoming Wildlife Federation. They've never had a chance to sit through a meeting like this, so thank you for giving them a very wonderful vision into this. I want to reiterate a lot of what my colleague Kristin just said, and just say that the details do count. It is where I know the sportsmen get very nuanced into that. But if you are okay with it, I want to let our intern say a little bit more about his thoughts.
Please state your name for the record and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Andrew, and on behalf of the Wyoming Wildlife Federation, I want to thank you all for your due diligence, commitment, and comedic responses once in a while. We are generally supportive of this transfer, and we want to find something to make sure that this exchange is not just pushed under the rug. I think that it's very important to have this on the forefront and make this actually happen.
Good. Yeah, go ahead, Co-Chairman Boner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just, and once again, we're kind of, it's still fairly theoretical in terms of the federal lands we get in exchange, but it seems possible that we'd have a net gain if we exchange this state surface for, say, federal minerals, that, we have a net gain of federal surface acres in the state, but a net loss of federal mineral acres. With that, I mean, from the conservation standpoint, would that be a favorable situation, you think, for your organization, or do you have any thoughts in particular as to that particular possibility of exchanging state surface for federal minerals?
I think it's very dependent on where that is, Mr. Chairman. And I think for the most part, and listening to your concerns, I'm pretty comfortable in saying we're pretty supportive of that process and that idea. But I think looking at access, I think looking at conservation value, the wildlife value is super, super important for the sportsman's support on this kind of thing. And, I would like to be on this, we're here because we want to see this from the ground up, and we don't want to end up at the end like blowing a whistle. I really don't like that, and that's not how we work well in this state. And I don't want to be that organization. So we're here, we're in, and we want to know the nuances.
Thank you. Further question, committee? Yes, Senator Steinmetz, go ahead.
Just one question. It seems like there's a little distrust between some organizations and us that we don't want the same goals that you do. We value conservation, we value wildlife. In fact, we're giving up a lot of our lives to serve in a position that we can serve the citizens and the sportsmen and the ranchers and all the folks that value that, because we value it too. So I would hope that going forward, we could communicate that to your membership, and that we could work more collaboratively rather than them thinking we're the bad guys, so to say.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, I fully agree with that. We were there at legislature till 10 o'clock at night with you guys, and it was amazing the work that you put in. And we know that we're here because we care, and we care about our state. And it is the wildlife, it's the big spaces, it's the incredible horizons and the amazing opportunities that the state of gives, not just to us, but to future generations in all aspects. We are on the same page with that. But yes, I think building that trust is something that we as Wyoming Wildlife Federation are really committed to. That's why we're back at the legislature as much as we have been. We're very invested in making sure that we're part of this conversation and not a person that's just lobbing a bomb across the aisle. Not our style.
And further question, committee? And could you state your name for the record, please?
Jesse Johnson with Wyoming Wildlife Federation.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Further public comment? Yes, come on up, Ken.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ken DeCary. I'm from the Wyoming School Boards Association. And I would like to just sort of refocus, and sometimes I feel like I'm the bad person in the room, but I think we got to focus back on what these are. And I'm only speaking with school trust lands, but school trust lands, they were given to the state of Wyoming at the act of admission with one purpose. There is no second purpose to them. The one purpose is to generate money for K-12 education. That's why they were given to the state. And so when you look at these decisions, I don't want the tail wagging the dog as far as this. I'm not saying there might be ways that you can work all this out and everybody gets what they want. But at the end of the day, it has to be, that we're trying to maximize the revenue off these parcels of ground. And so when those exchanges, and I applaud, the appraisal process, because that's a big sticking point. Make sure you're getting dollar for dollar, not acre for acre, because, as we all know in Wyoming, some land is worth much more than other lands. The Teton parcel, for example, that's a lot. And, I've kidded you before, but I'm just saying, if it's worth 46 million, if you give me 46 million, I'll double your money. I can generate at least $5,000 a year, of revenue off of that, and that's, the absurdity of that is that that's exactly where we're at. We have a piece of property that's worth a lot, and I know it appreciates every year, but it doesn't ever have a benefit. It's like unrealized capital gains that you guys all go through in the budget. You know, they're great on paper, but they don't ever do anybody any real good until you realize those gains at some point in time. And so I think as part of this, and I do, you know, thank you both, you know, chairman of this committee, because I know you've done that. And so, you know, it wouldn't even, you know, I think it might even be good to put that resolution back on the table as far as that, now that people have an understanding, you know, as part of that. Some of this, and I know you know, the Office of State Lands did that for a reason. They did the School Trust Land 101 because, you know, it's important for people to understand what it is we're talking about, you know, and what the function is and why they're doing what they're doing. I know they take that charge very seriously, and that goes back several directors in the Office of State Lands. You know, they try to operate under that scenario in order to make sure that we're generating these revenues that are needed. I think you also have to keep in mind that if you were in charge of a private trust, you know, say a family trust, you wouldn't be thinking about any of these particular decisions about it. You know, it's like, well, I can't do this because somebody, you know, might want to use it for some other purpose. You know, you'd be in violation of the trust obligation as a trustee. You know, say you were the trustee for young children in an estate. You know, what you're, at the end of the day, what you need to do is maximize for the purpose of the trust. And if that's to maximize revenue, that is the function. You know, that the rest of them, you know, if you can make them work, that's good, but it shouldn't be a driving force in any of this. And so I applaud that you're looking at those, you know, sections as far as what's going forward. I think it's, you know, a real opportunity for the state of Wyoming. We all know that, you know, educational funding is a need in the state of Wyoming, and how do we achieve that? And this is one that, you know, I mean, actually a long time ago, people figured out this might be a really good way to do this. A lot of states, you know, do this, mostly the Western United States, because they're the only ones that really got it, you know, the acreage as far as that. Utah comes up a lot, and Utah took this very seriously, trading some of these out. You know, when they had, you know, some of those wilderness areas and other things, they traded some of those sections out because they knew those school trust lands, if they get inside there, they basically become, you know, worthless from a financial perspective. I mean, there are other considerations, and I'm well aware of those, but, you know, they become worthless, and so they traded them out. And I know that they've actually had Representative Bishop out of Utah tried to put into a bill one time that any time that you designate any type of wilderness area, one of the first steps that has to go on is you have to trade out all the school trust lands, you know, before you can even designate, just so that you take that issue off the table. And so I think this is, you know, we're sort of at the first part of this, but we can see the good that's come on. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to all of you, you know, for doing this. I know that, you know, you've been talking about it for a couple of years now, and it's been an issue for longer than that. But it's very important that I think the state of Wyoming, you know, understands the trust obligation and tries to manage with that in mind. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ken. Question for Mr. DeCarry. Yes, Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken, do you think we should go after that Senate Joint Resolution 1 again? Do you think a letter to Congress or a resolution would help speed things up or not? It passed the Senate with flying colors, kind of got mucked up in the House, but I just wanted your opinion on it.
Well, I never think it's a bad. I mean, I was never a real fan of resolutions, but in this case, I think it's the PR part of it that's real important in order to do it. That, you know, people understand that, and some of it, to me, you know, I mean, it's not without thought that I call them school trust lands and I don't call them state lands, because, you know, those terms get mixed, and that comes problematic because people have a different idea of what a state land is or a public land is from a school trust land. And so I think it's good, but, you know, I know that the chairman have been in, you know, consultation, you know, and so I think some of that really comes down to where our federal delegation is. And, you know, how much they're interested in moving forward. And if they've already got that message, you know, I don't know if it's as important as it maybe it once was in order to raise that awareness.
Good, okay, Chairman Bowner.
And sorry, Mr. Chairman, I probably should have mentioned, I've personally been in contact at least with Representative Cheney's office, and that's the initial feedback that I've got is that this is something that could move forward. These land exchanges are relatively non-controversial, and something that could go forward and divided Congress. In fact, it already has. There's a big bill last March that had a lot of these land exchanges, and unfortunately, we missed that boat, but they thought that this was something that's realistic. So yeah, I mean, I'm certainly open to the committee's suggestions. You know, that's why we're having, and the public suggestions, that's why we're talking about this here. But you know, we'll, honestly, I'm just looking forward, especially after last session, just to kind of move forward with what we need to do to get it done at the federal level while still having the public be very much involved. And that may or may not include a resolution. So.
And Mr. Chairman, if I just might.
Go ahead, Ken.
Senator Boner did talk about that bill that passed last year at the federal level, and there were a lot of school trust land parcels in there. Utah traded out even more under that piece of legislation that they'd identified. And so at some point, part of this is you got to identify, and then you have to, you know, have this whole process moving forward. As you've heard, it takes time in order to get all this, but once you know and you have a pretty good idea of what those parcels can be, then, you know, then you just have to get the federal government or the Congress to actually act upon that and move that forward. And again, it's happened several times in the past, and I'm sure there'll be another one come up at some point in the future. Hopefully it'll involve Wyoming.
Further question for Mr. DeCaria? Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Further public comment? Ma'am.
Chairman Hunt and members of the committee, my name is Tammy Johnson with Wyoming Education Association. And I want to just dovetail off of what Ken DeCaria just spoke with you about. And one of the struggles that we've seen in the past with the land exchanges, not the federal ones, but the other ones that we've talked about here today, is the public perception. And the groups that come out in force that say, oh no, you can't do this, this isn't going to work. And we lost a great exchange up on Laramie Peak a few years ago because it didn't fit the needs of a specific group or groups that wanted to see that exchange. But it's the kids who lose. Then it's the schools that lose. And every time we come before the legislature and we talk about how we're going to pay for schools, and we see a very fine program like what you heard from the College of Ag today, that doesn't happen without great K-12 schools. And Senator Bebout often talks about having a Tier 1 engineering program at the University of Wyoming. That doesn't happen if we don't have Tier 1 kids coming out of our K-12 system. So what we're doing right now is we're doing things well and we're doing things right with education in order to grow those other programs, but we have to look at all the sources of revenue. And this one is the only one that's in the Constitution besides taxes. And we go down that road with Revenue Committee often, and we all know that that's something that death and taxes are the two things that we're assured of, except in Wyoming, it's just one of those things. So, so I think what I'd like to leave you with is, as we proceed down this course, and we need to make some land exchanges like we did, the one we did with the Bull Creek Ranch, it's really important that we present this to the public in a way so they understand what the benefit is. The real benefit is to the children of Wyoming, whom the trustees are, or the trustors are, and it's our job to make sure we get that money for them and to cut the education programs that we have in place now because we're not willing to go after those other sources of revenue. We're not doing full service to the kids. House Bill 308 that passed last year in the waning hours of that last night of the session was great because it freed up that $42 million a year that we can use for schools. And we need to look for other ways to do that to keep funding our schools. So any questions you have, I'm happy to answer if I can.
Thank you. Any questions, committee? Okay.
Glad Ken gets all the questions. Thank you.
Further public comment? Any further public comment? Going once, going twice. Okay, comment is closed. Committee? Actions, any discussion further that need to come before the committee on this? All right. Well, that I believe, is our final agenda item. So, just some wrapping up here, I guess. Some further housekeeping. Josh, our next meeting is in Wyoming, 5th and 6th, right? Anybody else, Jim? Anything?
Yeah.
Oh,
Processing.
right. Yeah, somebody heard that.
Amy.
Okay, Amy, we almost forgot about that. The tour of the wool processing, any comment on that or information?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing is that I'm going to head down there if you want to go. It's only about 30 minutes from here. And then the tour itself won't take very long. It take maybe 30 minutes to do that, and then you can be on the road. So anyone who's interested, just let me know. And the other thing is that they wanted me to let you know that even if you can't do it this time, if you happen to be in Buffalo and you would like to do it, just give them a call, and they'd be happy to arrange to do a tour.
Cool. All right, well, that sounds good. Well, hopefully, folks can attend if they're heading out of town. Just to real quickly make sure everybody has turned in their, travel vouchers form, so. And otherwise, I believe, I'm sorry.
Okay, and so Amy, the name of that is Mountain Meadow Wool Mill, is that correct? And that address is 22 Plains Drive, does that sound correct?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
and do you want to just plan for 2:30, does that work? We'll
Sure,
plan
that'd be
on meeting
perfect.
there at 2:30. And yeah, hope to see everybody there.
All right. So, anyway, all right, if there's no further business, then we are adjourned. Thank you, committee.